Gilderoy Lockhart is a character that in the films was all but forgotten after the second movie. In the books, he had much more detail, and Rowling even released more information on him after the series ended. In this video, I'm going to gather all of that information as I explain the life of Gilderoy Lockhart from the books. Gilderoy Lockhart was born into a family split magic-wise. He took after his mother, who was a witch, but his father and two older sisters were muggles. Because of this, he was his mother's favorite child, and she did not try to hide this. From a young age, it was clear that Lockhart was a very good-looking boy. He had wavy blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile that showed his perfectly white teeth. Between his good looks and constant praise from his mother, he had a lot of pride and admiration for himself. He was a clever boy, but all that praise went to his head, making him believe that he was better than he actually was. When Lockhart turned 11, he got his Hogwarts letter and was sent off to the wizarding school the following fall. His arrival at Hogwarts was not the triumph that he and his mother had expected, however. Having been the only sibling with magical abilities and being constantly praised by his mother, he thought he was the best of the best. Because of this, he was in for a bit of a shock when he got to Hogwarts, as he was now in a school full of wizards and witches, many of whom were more accomplished than him. He was no longer the outlier, but rather, he was seen as normal, and to some, even below average. Lockhart was sorted into Ravenclaw and was very underwhelmed by his first week at Hogwarts. He hadn't pictured his entrance to Hogwarts to be much more like that of Harry Potter years later. He had imagined walking down the corridors to excited whispers of his magical prowess. It never occurred to him that every student at Hogwarts had had similar experiences to him before starting school. In Lockhart's mind, he was already a fully fledged hero and genius, and it was a most unwelcome shock to discover that his name was unknown, his talents were unexceptional, and that nobody was really impressed by his naturally wavy hair. He was never very popular and didn't have many friends during his time at Hogwarts. He was very ambitious, perhaps too ambitious. He shared with his classmates, or anyone else that would listen, that he would succeed in making a Philosopher's Stone before leaving school, that he intended to captain England's Quidditch team to World Cup glory, and said that after that, he would become Britain's youngest Minister for Magic. Lockhart was naive and seemed to be pretty average. This, however, is not to say that he had no talent. A few of his teachers actually thought he was above average when it came to his intelligence and ability. They told him that with hard work, he might actually make something of himself. Lockhart was achieving good marks with the schoolwork, but there was always something part of his nature that made him increasingly unsatisfied. If he was not the first and the best, he would rather not participate at all. Throughout his years at Hogwarts, he began to direct his talents towards shortcuts and dodges rather than putting in the actual work. He valued learning not for its own sake, but for the attention that it brought him. He craved prizes and awards. He convinced the headmaster at the time to start a school newsletter because he liked nothing more than seeing his name and photograph in print. While Lockhart was never very popular, he still achieved his primary goal, which was to get school-wide recognition. He did this, however, through repeated attention-getting exploits. A few examples include him carving his signature into 20-foot-long letters on the Quidditch pitch, which got him detention for a week. He managed to create a massive illuminated projection of his own face, which he would send skywards in imitation of the Dark Mark. He sent himself 800 Valentine's cards one year, which caused such a pileup of owls in the Great Hall that breakfast had to be abandoned. Nevertheless, he finished his 7 years at Hogwarts and moved on to his career in the wizarding world. Lockhart leaving was a sigh of relief for most of the staff. He began to travel the world, and stories of his bravery and resilience began to become publicized. Articles were saying that he overcame dangerous places and fought dark creatures. Many of his ex-teachers began to question if they had misjudged Lockhart. His ex-teachers' first instincts were correct, however. He was a gifted wizard, but he was nothing like what the press was saying. The truth was that Lockhart had found his true calling at last. He had never been a bad wizard, only a lazy one. He decided to use his talents to go in one direction: memory charms. By perfecting this tricky spell, he had succeeded in modifying the memories of a dozen highly accomplished and courageous witches and wizards, allowing him to take credit for their daring exploits. He would have them tell him each detail of how they did these great deeds, and then he would simply wave his wand and make their memory vanish. He would return to Britain at the end of each adventure, and would write a book about his feats and bravery. He of course added a wealth of invented detail and lies to make it more exciting and to fill in the gaps of what the other wizards and witches did. He wrote 12 books, which included Break with a Banshee, Gadding with Ghouls, Gilderoy Lockhart's Guide to Household Pests, holidays with hags, magical me, marauding with monsters, 101 practical uses for birdie bots every flavor beans, travels with trolls, voyages with vampires, wanderings with werewolves, who am I, and Year with the Yeti. Most of these were stories based on what other people did, which he took credit for, but a great deal of them were just facts and details about Lockhart himself. His books had some ridiculous things happen in them, like him being cornered in a telephone booth by a werewolf. On every one of these books' covers was a giant smiling or winking picture of Lockhart himself. Within a decade of leaving school, Lockhart had achieved bestseller status with a series of autobiographical books and a reputation as a world-class defender against the dark arts. He was at the top of the bestsellers list for 6 months, which broke all records. He even received the Order of Merlin 3rd class, became an honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and even won Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 years in a row. Girls drooled over him, and the age group that he sold the most books to were middle-aged witches like Mrs. Weasley.
Mum fancies him.
At Hogwarts, the Defense Against the Dark Arts post was considered cursed, and it was very hard to find someone who would take on the job. Dumbledore invited Lockhart to teach, which baffled many staff members. They remembered Lockhart as thoroughly obnoxious, and didn't care what his later achievements were. Most of them, however, did not know that he was the only one who was willing to step up to take the job. Dumbledore had a plan. He happened to know 2 of the wizards who Lockhart had taken credit from. Because of this, Dumbledore might have been the only person in the world who thought he knew what Lockhart was up to. Dumbledore was convinced that Lockhart needed only to be put back into an ordinary school, somewhere that would reveal him as a fraud. When Professor McGonagall, who had never liked Lockhart, asked Dumbledore why he thought students could learn from such a vain and celebrity-hungry man, Dumbledore responded saying, "There is plenty to be learned, even from a bad teacher. What not to do, how not to be." When offered the position, Lockhart was not keen to return to Hogwarts, given his career of stolen glory was progressing. But Dumbledore dangled something in front of his fame-hungry eyes, the promise of Harry Potter, the boy who lived. By subtly suggesting that teaching Harry Potter would set the seal on Lockhart's fame, Dumbledore had set a lure that Lockhart could not resist. Lockhart made his students buy 7 of his books in order to increase his sales, which were horribly expensive. A week before he started his post at Hogwarts, he had a book signing in Diagon Alley. He sat at a table surrounded by pictures of his own face, all winking and flashing their white teeth at the crowd. While he was getting his picture taken, he saw Harry Potter, the very boy that convinced him to take the job at Hogwarts.
Can't be Harry Potter.
He pulled Harry over for a picture on the Prophet, knowing that this would be the icing on the cake for his fame. He told Harry that together, they were worth the front page of the Prophet. He also used this moment to make the announcement that he would be teaching at Hogwarts, and more importantly, that he would be teaching Harry Potter. He then gave Harry his entire works for free to make himself look good for the press. Moments later, Mr. Weasley and Lucius Malfoy got into a physical fight, which made Lockhart very pleased. He asked the reporter from the Daily Prophet if he'd be able to work the fight into his story, saying that it would boost publicity. By the time he arrived at Hogwarts, Lockhart's magical skills that were once rather good had become rusty almost beyond repair. The only spell for which he had real ability was the memory charm, which he had been using repeatedly for years. Lockhart tried to give the other staff members advice, basically BSing his way through every sentence. He tried to give Hagrid advice on how to get Kelpies out of the well, which annoyed Hagrid very much. He also bothered Professor Sprout while she was fixing the Whomping Willow. Lockhart tried to give her tips as she did so. She walked away with bandages on her hands, while Lockhart walked away unscathed. He further irritated Sprout by saying to a number of students, "Just showing Professor Sprout the right way to doctor a Whomping Willow, but I don't want you running away with the idea that I'm better at herbology than she is. I just happen to have met several of these exotic plants on my travels." Right before Harry was about to go into herbology class, Lockhart pulled him aside to the further annoyance of Sprout. He then said to Harry that it was his fault that Harry flew Mr. Weasley's car to Hogwarts. He explained that Harry got a taste of fame being on the front page with them, and now that he had a taste for it, he wanted more. He went on to say that Harry was a nobody and skipped over the boy who lived fame. I mean, a few people have heard of you, haven't they? All that business with he who must not be named. I know, it's not quite as good as winning Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award 5 times in a row as I have. But it's a start, Harry, it's a start. He winked at Harry and then strode off. Later on, Lockhart overheard Malfoy making fun of Harry, saying that he should give out signed photos to everyone. Lockhart immediately jumped in. He had Colin Creevey take a picture of him and Harry and said that both of them would sign it. Afterwards, he said that he covered for Harry by doing that, and lectured Harry, saying that he seemed big-headed, handing out signed pictures this early in his career. During this, he sneakily snuck in, him mentioning that he has to keep a stack of signed photos with him at all times, but said that Harry wasn't quite there yet. When he addressed his first Defense Against the Dark Arts class, he started by holding up a book with his face on the cover and said, "Me."
Gilderoy Lockhart, Order of Merlin, 3rd class, honorary member of the Dark Force Defense League, and 5 times winner of Witch Weekly's Most Charming Smile Award. But I don't talk about that. I didn't get rid of the band and banshee by smiling at them.
He then gave a quiz to the class, but instead of it being about Defense Against the Dark Arts, it was all about him.
Tut, tut. Hardly any of you remember that my favorite color is lilac.
For his first lesson with the second years, he decided to focus on freshly caught Cornish pixies, which made many students laugh. To counter the laughter, Lockhart opened the cage, and pandemonium broke out. They broke glass, ripped up books, and even put Neville on the chandelier. He told the class to round them up, and said that they were only pixies. Lockhart then tried to cast a spell to put a stop to the pixies' madness, but it had absolutely no effect. One of the pixies then took his wand and threw it out the window. He ducked under his desk, narrowly dodging Neville, who had fallen with the chandelier. When the bell rang, everyone rushed out, and Lockhart followed. On his way out, he told Harry, Ron, and Hermione to get them back in the cage. He slammed the door behind them and made a break for it. After that disastrous class, Lockhart took a different approach with his teaching, and decided to just read passages from his book. He also reenacted some of the more dramatic bits, most of the time using Harry to help him. Lockhart became very irritated with Hagrid when the two were talking about Harry giving out signed photos. Hagrid told him that Harry didn't need to do that because he was already more famous than him, which Lockhart took great offense to. After Hagrid told him that he had never read any of his books, an offended Lockhart decided to leave, but said that he would send a signed copy down to him that night. When Harry got detention, Lockhart volunteered to take Harry during his punishment. During his detention, Lockhart forced Harry to go through his fan mail with him. Lockhart lectured Harry about fame, gave him advice, and bragged about his own fame. After 4 hours, he finally let Harry go, and told him not to expect a treat like this every time he got detention. When Filch's cat was petrified, Lockhart offered his office to Dumbledore, which made him feel excited and important. Lockhart went on about how it was definitely a curse that killed the cat. A second later, however, Lockhart looked like an idiot, as Dumbledore said that the cat wasn't dead, but only petrified. Lockhart tried to recover by saying, "Ah, I thought so." Later on that year, Harry, Ron, and Hermione used Lockhart's idiocy against him and got him to sign a form saying that they could go into the restricted section of the library. When Harry broke his arm during a Quidditch match, Lockhart tried to fix it, but instead of fixing the broken bone, he got rid of all the bones in Harry's arm.
Yes, well, that can sometimes happen. But the point is, you can no longer feel any pain. And very clearly, the bones are not broken.
Broken? There's no bones left.
When Lockhart realized that he messed up, he told Ron and Hermione to escort Harry to the hospital wing and said that Madame Pomfrey would tidy up his mess. Lockhart started a dueling club where Snape was his assistant. When they demonstrated, Snape sent Lockhart flying backwards off the stage, smashed into a wall, and slid down to a sprawl on the floor. Lockhart tried to recover by saying,
It was pretty obvious what you were about to do, and if I had wanted to stop you, it would have been only too easy.
Lockhart tried to show Harry how to block a spell, and as he did so, he dropped his wand, which made Snape laugh at him. He then told Harry to just do what he did, and Harry responded saying, "What, drop my wand?" When Malfoy made a snake appear, Lockhart tried to get rid of it, but instead of it vanishing, it shot into the air, showing his incompetence. Later on that year, Hermione ended up in the hospital wing, and Lockhart sent her a get well soon card, and more than half of the card was him signing his name and his many titles. That year, the Chamber of Secrets had been opened, and a number of attacks had taken place, but when the attacks suddenly stopped, Lockhart bragged to Professor McGonagall, saying that he single-handedly made the attacks stop. On Valentine's Day, Lockhart made the Great Hall covered in flowers, had heart-shaped confetti fall, and arranged for dwarves dressed as Cupid to deliver special valentines for students, something that made the rest of the staff stone-faced and disapproving. When Ginny was taken down to the chamber, and a note was left, saying that her skeleton would lie in the chamber forever, Lockhart inappropriately entered the staff meeting very late and with a wide smile on his face, saying that he had dozed off. Snape then stepped forward and said that Lockhart's moment had come, and explained to him that a girl had been taken down to the chamber. Professor Sprout then piped up and mentioned how just last night, Lockhart had said that he knew where the entrance to the chamber was. Snape then mentioned how Lockhart had wished that he had a crack at the monster before Hagrid was blamed and arrested. McGonagall then said that they would leave it to him, and he began to stutter, becoming visibly scared. He no longer looked handsome, his lip was trembling, and without his usual toothy grin, he looked weak-chinned and feeble. He left the staff meeting, saying that he would start to prepare for this dangerous mission. When Lockhart left, he immediately began to start packing his things. As he was doing this, however, Ron and Harry knocked on his door, telling him that they knew where the entrance was and what the monster was. Eventually, however, they realized that he was trying to flee, and they put together that he was a fraud.
After all that stuff you did in your books,
Books can be misleading.
you wrote them.
My dear boy, do use your common sense. My books wouldn't have sold half as well if people didn't think I'd done all those things.
You're a fraud.
Once he packed everything, he turned to face Ron and Harry, ready to erase their memories now that they knew the truth. Right when he picked up his wand, however, Harry disarmed him. Ron caught his wand and threw it out the window. Harry and Ron forced a shaking Lockhart to the entrance of the chamber and forced him to go down first. He was white-faced and shaking with terror. When he went in, he slid down a long, slimy pipe that ruined his fancy robes. When the three of them moved on, they came across a giant snakeskin. Although his books made him seem like a brave hero, he was quite the opposite here. He had his hands pressed over his eyes as they approached the snakeskin, too scared to look. Lockhart suddenly got an idea and fell to his knees. When Ron went over to him, Lockhart dove at him, knocking him to the ground. He took Ron's wand and straightened up, the gleaming smile back on his face. He told them that he was going to take a piece of the snake's skin back to the school, tell everyone that he was too late to save the girl, and say that Harry and Ron lost their minds at the sight of her mangled body. Lockhart did the thing that he was best at.
Say goodbye to your memories.
But as he cast the spell, Ron's broken wand caused an explosion that sent Lockhart flying back and an avalanche of rocks to fall, separating Harry from Lockhart and Ron. As Harry went on to save Ginny, Ron realized that Lockhart had hit himself with a memory charm and was blanking on his entire life.
It's an odd sort of place, this, isn't it? Do you live here?
While they waited for Harry, Lockhart sat in the corner and hummed to himself. When Harry returned with Ginny, Ron took Harry over to Lockhart and said that he was a danger to himself. As the four of them flew out of the chamber, being pulled by Fawkes the Phoenix, Lockhart yelled,
Amazing! This is just like magic!
When they returned to Dumbledore, Dumbledore addressed Lockhart, who looked over his shoulder to see who he was talking to, not knowing his own name. Ron then told Dumbledore that there had been an accident down in the chamber with Professor Lockhart. Lockhart responded to this, saying, "Am I a professor? Goodness, I expect I was hopeless." When Ron told him that he had been hit by his own memory charm, Dumbledore, who knew of his lies and deceit to get famous, said to Lockhart, "Impaled upon your own sword, Gilderoy." Dumbledore then asked Ron to take Lockhart up to the infirmary. Lockhart was later sent away to get his memory back. Many people at the school celebrated him not being able to return the following year at Hogwarts, including both students and staff members. He would eventually become a permanent resident of St. Mungo's Hospital for Magical Maladies and Injuries, and although they tried very hard to get his memory back, it was no use. One day, Lockhart slipped out of the ward and came face to face with Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny. He still had his good looks, with wavy blonde hair and bright blue eyes, but now his pearly white smile was dazed and vacant. Ron asked how he was in a slightly guilty way. As Lockhart took out a quill to sign autographs, he explained to them that he could do joined up writing now, which was referring to writing in cursive, clearly showing that his mind wasn't there, and that such a small accomplishment was a big step forward in his recovery. When he gazed into Harry's eyes, he asked him if they had met before. Harry told him that he was their teacher, and a smile came across Lockhart's face as he said, "Taught you everything you know, I expect." Just then, a motherly-looking healer found Lockhart and told him he was a naughty boy for wandering off. She smiled warmly at Harry and the others, excited that Lockhart had visitors. She then told him that he never got visitors, a fact that was sad due to how famous he was. The healer treated him as though he was 2 years old, calling him sweetie and encouraging him when he did small things like talk to people. She then explained to Harry and the others that he used to be rather well known a few years back, and she told them that they hoped his liking for signing autographs was a sign that his memory might be coming back a little bit. She then told him that he wasn't dangerous to others, but that he was dangerous to himself. She explained how he would wander off, but his memory was so messed up that he wouldn't remember how to get back. The healer was grateful that they had come to visit Lockhart. She, however, did not know that they had not meant to run into him, but nonetheless, they followed her back to his ward. As she walked, she kept a firm grasp on Lockhart's arm until she settled him into an armchair next to his bed. The healer explained Lockhart's recovery further, saying that in this permanent spell damage ward, they were able to give him potions and use charms, and they were hopeful that with a bit of luck, they could produce some improvement. She told them that Lockhart seemed to be getting back to some sense of himself. Lockhart had pictures of himself above his headboard, all with gleaming smiles. Many of them had been autographed to himself in disjointed, childish writing. Lockhart continued to get some fan mail, some fans even writing weekly, but Lockhart was clueless as to why he had fans and why he was getting the fan mail. While Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny were there, he told them that the reason he thought he was getting the mail was simply because he was so good looking. Despite the many efforts of the St. Mungo staff, Lockhart never fully recovered. He ended up spending the rest of his life in the spell damage ward, barely knowing who he was. Lockhart was a liar and a cheater, desperate for attention. He became very skilled at using memory charms and ran with that. Instead of learning many different skills, he perfected one of them and used it to lazy his way out of doing much work. As Dumbledore said, the tool that served him so well and gave him so much praise and fame was the same thing that was his ultimate downfall. Thank you so much for watching, guys. You can follow me on social media. Links for that will be down below. If you like this video, make sure you press that subscribe button to help grow the channel. I want to give a huge shout out to all my patrons listed below. If you want to be featured on the next video, plus get a bunch of other rewards, check out my Patreon. Again, thank you so much for watching, and look out for more great videos on the way.